We are going to completely challenge the traditional way we learn about cells today. Too often, we're taught to look at an animal cell as just a static, tiny little blob under a microscope, covered in random labels that you just have to memorize for a test. But honestly, an animal cell is so much more than that. It's literally the smallest unit of existence that can actually do all the things we call life, which is exactly why it's known as the fundamental unit of life. It takes in resources, makes energy, responds to signals, repairs itself, and stays incredibly organized.
An animal cell is a living system of parts that work together, not a box of separate labels. Think about a massive, bustling workshop for a second. Every single tool has a highly specific role, every worker depends on the others, and the whole place only functions because everything is perfectly coordinated. If one station stops, the entire workshop feels the impact immediately. Understanding a cell is entirely about understanding these connections, rather than just memorizing a dry vocabulary list.
To really grasp this, we need to completely shift our mental model. We have to stop seeing the cell as a museum of objects, where parts are just statically displayed behind glass for us to gawk at. Instead, we should view it as an incredibly well-run factory. Now, unlike plant cells, which have rigid cell walls to stand tall and chloroplasts to manufacture their own food directly from sunlight, animal cells belong to creatures that move, adapt, and hunt. Because of that, animal cells actually lack those rigid walls so they can remain flexible, and they rely entirely on taking in outside fuel to survive. This cellular factory isn't trying to just exist in some abstract way. It is actively and constantly working to solve complex biological problems. Which leads us to a pretty fascinating question. What problems must life solve? To keep itself alive every single second of the day, this tiny cellular city, which floats in a jelly-like environment called the cytoplasm, must constantly manage several non-negotiable demands. The cytoplasm provides the actual physical landscape where all these problems are solved, giving everything a place to move and interact. The cell needs boundaries, supply lines, power, building materials, cleanup operations, and communication. It survives by solving all of these incredible challenges at exactly the same time within that bustling cytoplasmic landscape. When you break it down like this, the major parts of the cell aren't just random words to cram into your brain. They are direct, brilliant evolutionary solutions to unavoidable problems. The need to keep separate from the outside world is solved by a selective border. The need to power activity is solved by an energy supply. The need for instructions is met by a protected plan, and the actual physical labor is carried out by specialized tools. We can explore these step by step to see exactly how this factory manages to stay alive, starting with that very first absolutely crucial boundary. Imagine a city without walls, roads, or checkpoints. It would lose control in a heartbeat. Things would just drift in and out randomly, creating total chaos. The cell membrane solves this by acting as a highly selective boundary. It separates the internal cytoplasm from the outside world, but crucially, it decides what is actually allowed to pass back and forth. Think of a home with a front door rather than a solid, impenetrable brick wall. It happily welcomes important deliveries and family members, but keeps out wandering strangers. The membrane carefully gatekeeps, proving that life depends on dynamic control, not absolute isolation. But a city with great walls still fails if the power grid goes down. Structure alone just isn't enough. Life depends on an unbroken flow of energy. The mitochondria brilliantly solve this problem. They're the structures that constantly convert energy from the food you eat into a usable form to literally pay for the cell's physical work. Just like a busy restaurant kitchen needs gas or electricity to actually cook a meal, structure alone won't feed anyone. The mitochondria provide the essential fuel that makes movement, repair, and molecule building entirely possible inside our cellular factory. Now, imagine if our factory or city suddenly forgot how to rebuild its own infrastructure. It would slowly but surely fall apart. That is exactly why information must be stored somewhere incredibly stable. Enter the nucleus. It acts as the protected library and central planning office, holding the cell's vast genetic instructions. It safely locks away the master recipe, the DNA, deep in the cell so it never loses its identity or forgets how to build exactly what it needs to survive the constant wear and tear of daily life. But here's the catch. The nucleus doesn't do the physical labor itself. A planning office alone doesn't build a bridge, right? That heavy lifting falls to the proteins, which are manufactured by tiny, dedicated workstations called ribosomes. These ribosomes read the instructions from the nucleus and assemble the proteins piece by piece. Once built, these proteins act like a massive collection of specialized tools in a workshop, where a hammer does a completely different job than a saw. Whenever you ask what a part of the cell does, you are really asking what job in the city a specific protein tool is solving.
With all these tools and energy flowing, the cell is incredibly busy. And even though these parts are microscopic, they require strict internal organization to prevent total chaos. Think about a commercial kitchen again. Flour, spices, knives, water, and dishes can all exist in the exact same building, but if they're scattered everywhere randomly, cooking becomes literally impossible. This structured workspace relies on a network of pathways called the Endoplasmic Reticulum, or ER for short, which acts like a highway system transporting materials throughout the cytoplasm. Once materials are built, they are sent over to the Golgi Apparatus, a specialized packaging center that modifies, sorts, and ships these tools exactly where they are needed. This tight logistical network is what makes all this complex biochemical work possible.
And our tiny city definitely does not survive in silence. Communication is survival. These cells aren't just passive blobs floating around. They are constantly receiving and interpreting chemical signals from their environment and from other cells. It's very much like a smartphone, constantly sorting through notifications to figure out what needs an immediate response, what's just background noise, and what actions to take, like whether it's time to grow, divide, or repair sudden damage. Now we can see the real magic of this whole system. The cell is not alive just because each part exists. It is alive because each part depends on the others. Life emerges not from the individual parts sitting in isolation, but from the coordinated labor and the unbroken chain of dependence between them. This incredible coordination even extends to reproduction. Special structures called centrioles step in to perfectly organize and divide the city when it is time to create a brand new cell. None of these jobs makes full sense entirely on their own. This all builds into a highly functional, continuous workflow. Initially, the nucleus provides the blueprint and the central plan. Following that, the ribosomes and proteins act as the specialized workers to physically execute that detailed plan. Ultimately, the entire cell thrives off the resulting biological action. The nucleus gives the direction, the ribosomes and proteins execute the grueling labor, and the whole biological system benefits from the result. It is a completely seamless loop of information becoming physical reality. It's incredibly common to think of energy and information as two totally separate things, but in a living cell, they are tightly linked together. Think of a car for a moment. It needs both a map for direction and fuel for power. A map without fuel gets you absolutely nowhere, and fuel without a map gets you moving, but mindlessly and without purpose. In our cellular city, instructions from the nucleus have no direction without energy. And the energy from the mitochondria is completely useless without a solid plan. This deep interconnectedness means we have to look at everything as an active network. The cell membrane, for example, is involved in absolutely everything. It actively regulates food entering and works directly with the cell's internal recycling centers, which are called lysosomes, to break down and safely remove waste and worn-out parts. Lysosomes ensure the active network stays clean and unpolluted. This proves that the cell survives by managing complex relationships and adapting to its environment, not by walling itself off completely. So, what actually happens when one part of this intricate network struggles? Well, biology is a massive chain reaction. A failing membrane means internal balance is immediately lost. Damaged mitochondria bring physical work to a grinding halt. A compromised nucleus results in the construction of incorrect proteins. When these cellular factories fail, the tissues and organs they make up begin to fail. This is exactly why understanding the cell is the ultimate foundation of modern medicine and health. Curing a disease almost always comes down to fixing a broken process inside this microscopic city. Which brings us to a really profound realization about what it actually means to be alive at this microscopic level. A brick wall is just structure. A machine is structure plus function. But a living cell is structure, function, communication, and self-maintenance, all working together in perfect harmony. Life is not just structure. Life is regulated activity. It is the continuous, coordinated effort of all these parts, keeping the entire system going against all odds every single second. By looking at the cell as a coordinated living city, you've moved way past just memorizing a list of vocabulary words. You now have a powerful framework. The next time you encounter a new cell part, don't just stare at it and memorize its name for a test. Look at it and ask yourself, what problem does this solve? Understanding the relationships between these parts is infinitely more valuable than just knowing what they are called. When you ask how they connect, you'll immediately see how they fit into this beautiful, living system. So, what other invisible systems are operating exactly like this right under our noses, just waiting to be understood? Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and you will absolutely find out.